Every morning in a quiet coastal diner, a single-dad janitor quietly made breakfast for a young soldier, and her little girl never imagining that his small act of kindness was about to pull him into a world far bigger, deeper, and more life-changing than anything he had ever known. Because the woman he helped every dawn wasn't just a tired mother in uniform. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful admirals in the Navy, carrying secret scars and a storm that only kindness could calm. Today, you'll discover how a simple plate of toast healed a broken family and changed 3 lives forever. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about courage, second chances, and the quiet power of kindness, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next inspiring tale. Let's begin. The diner woke before the town did. Every morning, long before the sun bothered to climb over the quiet Navy port, the soft jingle of a brass bell broke the silence as Harrison Cole pushed open the door. The place still smelled like the night before, coffee gone cold, a hint of maple syrup chairs tucked in, waiting for footsteps and stories. He swept a strand of long brown hair behind his ear, tied it loosely at the back, and exhaled a steady breath. Another day, another morning he had to hold together. Harrison wasn't a man who needed much. A simple job as the diner's janitor, a roof over his head, and his 12-year-old son Lucas waiting for him at home most nights. Life had taught him the quiet dignity of small routines, sweeping floors, wiping down counters, making things a little better than he found them. Maybe that was why he always arrived before anyone else. Silence made room for his thoughts, and work gave those thoughts somewhere to go. He hung his worn jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The cold metal of the coffee urn clicked beneath his fingers as he started the brew. Then he set out plates, straightened booths, and stacked napkins into neat squares, every movement deliberate, unhurried, almost meditative. But there was one ritual he always saved for last: a white ceramic plate, freshly toasted bread, a knife gliding down in slow, careful strokes. Harrison cut each slice into small squares, tiny enough for little fingers to grab, soft enough for a sleepy 3-year-old to chew. He didn't know when it became a habit. He only knew who it was for. At precisely 7:10 every morning, the bell above the door chimed again, gentler this time, hesitant, almost shy. And there she was, Lena Carter in her olive green uniform, her name patch stitched just above her heart. She carried her daughter on her hip like a precious thing she feared the world might bruise. Nora Carter was always smiling when she saw him. He pretended not to notice how that smile made something inside him loosen, like a knot untied. Nora would wiggle until her mother set her down, then rush to the booth near the window, the one that caught the morning sun. Harrison always pretended he just happened to be nearby, wiping a table, adjusting salt shakers. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to be close enough to see the moment Nora's eyes lit up at the plate waiting for her. Today was no different. The little girl's squeal echoed through the diner as she climbed onto the yellow vinyl seat. Bread, she chirped, clapping. Lena shook her head, embarrassed, her cheeks warming. "Nora, honey, say good morning first." Nora turned wide-eyed, delighted. "Good morning, Mr. Harry." He smiled, the kind of soft smile he rarely had for anyone else. Morning sunshine. Lena exhaled as she slid into the booth across from her daughter. There was a weariness in her shoulders, a heaviness in the way she pushed a stray hair behind her ear. She was young, far too young for the weight she carried, but there was a steadiness in her eyes, a soldier's steadiness, a mother's desperation. "Thank you again," she murmured, voice low. "You don't have to do all this." Harrison shrugged as he set down the knife. "Just toast. Doesn't take much." But she knew he knew they weren't talking about toast. For weeks, Harrison had been the quiet constant in their mornings, a small kindness here, a steady presence there. He never asked why Lena always looked like she hadn't slept. Never asked why she jumped when loud noises echoed from the kitchen. Never asked why she kept glancing at the door, as though expecting someone to burst through it. She didn't offer explanations. He didn't seek any. That was their unspoken agreement. Still, Harrison noticed things. The tremor in her hands when Nora dropped a cup. The haunted look in her eyes when a truck rumbled past the window. The way she clutched her daughter, as if anchoring them both to this tiny diner booth. He noticed, and somehow noticing felt like enough. Nora shoved a piece of toast into her mouth, crumbs sprinkling everywhere. Harrison chuckled and kneeled beside her to gently brush them away before they fell onto her lap. She giggled, grabbing his thumb with sticky hands. "Careful there," he whispered. "Your mom's gonna think I'm spoiling you." From across the table, Lena watched him, quiet, still, eyes softening in a way he didn't see. To Harrison, she simply seemed tired. To Lena, it felt like something inside her chest cracked open just a little. Her late husband used to cut bread for Nora like that. Slowly, tenderly, as if time could wait until their daughter was fed and happy. And seeing Harrison kneeling there, now gentle and patient, brought a rush of memory so vivid she had to blink it back. She swallowed hard. "Harry," she said softly, "you really don't have to." He tightened the lid on Nora's juice cup and glanced up at her. "I know," he said, "but I want to." Lena's breath hitched, not enough for him to notice, but enough for her to feel. Gratitude and fear tangled inside her like roots. She leaned against the booth, trying to steady herself. "Thank you," she whispered, almost inaudible. The diner door opened again, letting in a gust of cold air. But Lena didn't take her eyes off Harrison, off the quiet way he wiped syrup off the table, off the tenderness he didn't seem aware he possessed. For a split second, her hand trembled, a small tremor barely there. The spoon she was holding slipped from her grasp. It clattered toward the floor. Harrison's reflex was instant. He reached out and caught it midair before it touched the tiles. He looked up, brows knit with concern. "You okay?" he asked softly. Lena couldn't speak for a moment. Her throat tightened. She nodded, but the nod wasn't convincing. Harrison didn't press. He simply set the spoon down and gave her a look. Not pity, not curiosity, just quiet reassurance. And that somehow was worse, because it meant he saw her, and she wasn't used to being seen. Outside, the sunlight finally broke through the morning clouds, casting warm gold across the diner window. Nora hummed as she ate. Lena steadied her breathing. Harrison rose slowly, wiping his hands on his apron, and returned to the counter. He didn't realize Lena's eyes followed him, grateful, fragile, and afraid. She didn't realize this morning would be one of their last peaceful ones. But they both felt something shift, subtle, but undeniable. Like the first ripple before a coming storm. The afternoon sun hung low when Lena Carter left the base that day, Nora's small hand tucked inside hers. The wind coming off the Atlantic carried a salty bite, sharp enough to sting the skin, familiar enough to remind her she'd been born into this life uniform's duty sacrifice. But lately, even the sea felt heavier. She opened the door to her small apartment, and Nora rushed inside, with the boundless energy only a 3-year-old could hold. Lena watched her daughter spin in lazy circles across the hardwood floor, humming some melody she'd made up. For a moment, Lena smiled. Then the smile faded. She locked the door with a trembling hand, pressing her back to it for support. The silence of the apartment swallowed her whole. Too quiet. Too many thoughts. Too many memories she'd been trying to outrun. Her therapist called them shadows. Lena called them something else, something darker, something shaped like loss. She walked into the kitchen, placed her keys on the counter, and steadied herself with a long, shaky inhale. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath since morning. since the spoon, since that moment when her fingers had refused to obey her, since Harrison Cole's quiet eyes, steady, kind, unjudging, caught the truth she tried so hard to bury. She sank into a chair. Her uniform felt heavier today. The patches, the stitching, the weight of her last name, Carter, threaded above her heart like a reminder she never escaped. Expectations clung to her like invisible armor. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Stand straight, Lena. A Carter doesn't falter. Carry yourself with discipline. Control is everything." But Lena had lost control a long time ago. Nora toddled over and climbed into her lap, the warmth of her tiny body grounding her. "Mommy, sad," the little girl asked, tapping her cheek. Lena swallowed hard. "No, honey. Just thinking." Nora pressed her forehead to Lena's. "Daddy used to say thinking makes Mommy's eyebrows squish together." Lena closed her eyes. That hurt. More than she wanted it to. She lifted Nora and hugged her so tightly the child giggled. "Your daddy was a wise man," she whispered. But the moment Lena set Nora down, the edges of her vision blurred again. She pressed her palms to the table to steady herself. Her mind replayed the same images that haunted her nights, her husband's last deployment, the knock on the door, the folded flag, his voice fading into memory, and then the other images louder, sharper, born from her own deployment. Dust, gunfire, screams, a child crying in the dark, her hands trembling as she tried to bandage a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Orders shouted, radios crackling, the metallic taste of fear clinging to her tongue. Some memories refused to stay in the past. She didn't want them to touch Nora. Ever, which was why the diner mattered more than she could explain. That tiny yellow booth was the only place where mornings didn't feel like a battlefield, where Nora smiled freely, where Lena could breathe for a few minutes, where Harrison Cole was. She didn't understand why his presence anchored her, but it did quietly, steadily. He didn't know her rank, her record, her nightmares. He didn't know she carried the Carter name, or that her mother wasn't just any Navy officer, but the Admiral Helena Carter. He didn't know the weight of that lineage, or the shame Lena felt for not living up to it. He just saw her a tired mom with a little girl who loved toast. And somehow, that was enough. She glanced toward the bedroom where Nora was playing with stuffed animals. Then she reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out the object that had made Harrison's brows lift earlier that morning. The insignia. Her insignia. It wasn't supposed to fall out. She always kept it tucked away. She didn't want people in town to know who she was, or worse, who her mother was. Life felt simpler when she was Lena, not Lieutenant Carter or the Admiral's daughter. She turned the metal over in her hand, its cold edge pressed into her palm like a reminder she couldn't escape. A soft knock on her front door startled her. She froze. No one visited her, not without calling first. And her mother didn't knock. Admiral Helena Carter made her presence known without the courtesy of hesitation. Lena gingerly approached the door. Her pulse thudded in her ears. When she peered through the peephole, relief washed over her, followed by guilt. It was only the neighbor dropping off a package incorrectly delivered. She took it with a polite smile, thanked him, and closed the door. But the fear lingered. She was unraveling. Later that night, after Nora fell asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, Lena sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea. She couldn't shake the image of Harrison catching that spoon, effortless, gentle, like it was second nature to look after the two of them. She whispered into the quiet, "You're holding it together, Lena. One more day. Just one more day." But the words rang hollow, because deep down she knew something was coming, something bigger than she was prepared for, the kind of storm she'd never outrun before. and she was terrified that this time she wouldn't be able to shield Nora from it. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat pound beneath her uniform. She reached into her bag for Nora's lunchbox to clean it, and the faint smell of toast crumbs drifted up. It was ridiculous, but it brought tears to her eyes. A simple plate of bread squares. A small kindness repeated every morning. A ritual she clung to without admitting why. Harrison didn't know her past. He didn't know her nightmares. He didn't know how many days she'd almost chosen not to get out of bed. But he saw the tremble. And he didn't look away. And that more than anything terrified her. Because kindness, real kindness, had a way of cracking open the walls she'd spent years building. And she wasn't sure what would spill out when those walls finally broke. The next morning arrived with a softness that didn't quite match the heaviness in Lena's chest. She barely slept. Nora had woken twice, crying from a dream she couldn't explain, and each time Lena held her, the child's trembling blended with her own. Still at 6:45 a.m., mother and daughter pushed open the diner door as they always did. The bell above the entrance jingled a familiar, comforting sound. And there he was, already in motion. Harrison Cole, wiping down the counter, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, moving with that calm certainty she'd come to rely on. Nora spotted him immediately. "Harry," she squealed, and her tiny boots pattered across the floor. Harrison turned just in time to catch her in a gentle lift. "Well, good morning to you." "Too little Blossom," he said, swinging her just high enough to make her giggle. Lena paused at the doorway, watching them. There was something about the way Harrison held her daughter with tenderness, but not careful in the way people usually were around children who'd been through trauma. He treated Nora like a child, not a fragile artifact, and that mattered more than he knew. When she reached the booth, she noticed the plate was already there. Bread sliced into perfect squares. Steam still rising, meaning he'd timed it down to the minute, so the pieces would be warm when they arrived. Her throat tightened. "Rough night?" Harrison asked gently as he set Nora down beside her. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. How could she tell him about the dream, about the fear, about feeling like she was drowning every time the world got too quiet? So she just nodded. Harrison didn't push. He never did. He simply offered the small comfort of silence, something most people didn't know how to give. Nora began stacking bread squares like little building blocks, humming. Harrison knelt beside her, tapping one of the pieces. "That one goes on top. See, like a tower." Nora giggled. Like Daddy used to make. Lena froze. Harrison's hand slowed for just a second, his eyes flicking toward her, gentle but curious. Not intrusive. Not asking for more than she could give. He cleared his throat softly. Sounds like he was a fun dad. Nora nodded with all the seriousness a 3-year-old could muster. Daddy made towers. Mommy made them fall down. Lena laughed, too quickly, too defensively, but Harrison's smile eased her nerves. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. He used to make her count the pieces before stacking them. Said it helped her focus. "Smart man," Harrison murmured. Then, without thinking, he picked up 3 pieces. 1, 2, 3. He counted, his voice low, steady. Nora's face lit up. Again. And just like that, he was teaching her, counting with her, laughing with her, showing the same patient, warm presence Lena once feared she'd never see in her daughter's life again. The sight squeezed her heart so unexpectedly, so painfully, that she had to look away. She blinked rapidly, swallowing the surge of emotion. Not here. Not in public. Not where anyone might see her break. She reached for her bag as a distraction, pulling out Nora's tiny juice bottle. Something metallic clinked against the side. Harrison's head turned at the sound. A small object slipped out, a bronze pin engraved with a symbol he didn't recognize, but instinctively understood. a military insignia. It landed with a soft tap on the table. Lena's breath caught. Harrison looked at it, then at her. His eyes were steady, not judgmental, not surprised, just quietly taking in what the object meant. She grabbed it quickly, almost too quickly. Her hand trembled as she stuffed it back into her pocket. Nora, oblivious, continued counting. 4, 5, 6. Oops! Her tower collapsed into crumbs. Harrison chuckled and helped her gather them, but his eyes kept flicking back to Lena. She felt exposed, like a layer of her she fought to hide had been peeled away. He rose, slowly wiped his hands on his apron, and asked softly, "Everything all right?" Lena forced a nod. Just dropped something. But Harrison knew better. He didn't push, but he didn't back away either. Instead, he slid into the booth across from her, something he'd never done before. For weeks, he'd kept a respectful distance, hovering near enough to help, but far enough to keep boundaries clear. Today, he closed that distance. "Lena," he said quietly, "you don't have to explain anything. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her eyes darted toward Nora, then back to him. Vulnerability flickered across her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it. A long moment passed. Finally, she said in a whisper, "Some days are harder than others." Harrison nodded. "I get that." A simple reply. Honest. Unpretentious. But the words hit like a warm weight settling over her. She studied him, then really looked at him. The rough hands, the faint scar near his brow, the quiet strength in the way he held himself. He wasn't a man who pitied easily. He wasn't a man who talked just to fill silence. He was a man who understood pain without demanding the story behind it. And that made her chest ache. A clatter from behind the counter pulled Harrison's attention away. The young cook had dropped a tray, and the crash echoed through the diner. Lena flinched, full body, involuntary, violent. Her hands flew to Nora, pulling the child closer instinctively. Harrison saw. He moved to her side so quickly she didn't see him cross the floor. He crouched next to her booth again, speaking softly. "It's just a tray. Nothing else. You're safe." Her breaths came fast. Too fast. Nora patted her arm, confused. Mommy Lena forced a shaky smile. "I'm okay, baby. Mommy's okay." Harrison didn't touch her. He seemed to understand physical closeness might push her over the edge. Instead, he lowered his voice even more. "You're not alone, Lena. Not here." Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back. She wasn't supposed to fall apart in front of anyone, least of all a diner janitor she barely knew. But as she steadied Nora and tried to slow her breathing, she felt something shift again. Something fragile, something dangerous. Trust. She wasn't ready for it, but it was there. The rest of the meal passed quietly. When Lena finally rose to leave, she raised her eyes to Harrison. "Thank you," she murmured. He smiled lightly. "Same time tomorrow." She hesitated. Her heart thudded. "Yes." As she carried Nora out of the diner, she didn't look back, but Harrison did. He watched the door swing shut, watched the empty booth, watched the crumbs Nora had left behind. And as he bent to wipe them carefully into his palm, he found something wedged beneath the napkin. Lena's insignia. Left behind. Accidentally, or maybe not. He turned it over in his palm, brow furrowing. The symbol wasn't just military, wasn't just rank. It was authority, history, legacy. Something far bigger than the quiet, exhausted mom who sat by his window every morning. And something told him this was only the beginning. The morning light crept slowly across the diner windows, casting soft golden lines across the floor. Harrison Cole unlocked the door at exactly 6:02 a.m., a minute later than usual. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the restlessness that had followed him through the night, lingering in the quiet corners of his apartment. He moved through his routines, wiping counters, warming the griddle, brewing the first pot of coffee. But something felt off. The air itself seemed too still, too expectant. At 6:40, he finished slicing the toast, arranging the tiny squares on the white ceramic plate that had become a silent part of his mornings. At 7:00, Harrison set the plate by the window booth. A small gesture, a simple ritual, but not one he ever skipped. He glanced toward the door. They always arrived at 7:10, not 7:08, not 7:12, always 7:10. He checked the clock again. 6:59 already felt heavy. As time stretched into the next minute, he found himself replaying yesterday's moments. Nora stacking bread squares, Lena flinching at the dropped tray. The way her hands trembled, her breath quickened her eyes, clouded with a fear she fought desperately to hide. He remembered the insignia she left behind. It was still tucked in the pocket of his apron, now its weight warmer than metal should be. 7. Tenton arrived. Harrison's gaze snapped to the door. Nothing. He wiped his hands on a towel and forced himself to move to busy himself with cleaning when there was nothing left to clean. He told himself they were simply running late. Maybe Nora was having a hard morning. Maybe Lena overslept. But a small voice in the back of his mind, the one trained by years of noticing things, whispered something different. 7:15. Still nothing. A couple entered the diner for breakfast, nodding at Harrison as they took a booth. He greeted them, poured coffee, made conversation, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. 7:22. The couple ordered omelets. Harrison took the order, but caught himself glancing at the empty booth by the window. The plate of bread squares sat untouched, steam now fading. He tightened his jaw. 7:30. Harrison wiped down a table that didn't need wiping. He straightened napkins that were already straight. He moved with the physical memory of routine, but his mind was somewhere else at the apartment complex, where he'd dropped off a forgotten toy for Nora 2 weeks ago, at the gate, where base personnel sometimes checked IDs without warning at the darker corners of memory he never allowed himself to revisit. 7:41. He poured himself coffee, took one sip, couldn't swallow it. 8:05. By then the morning crowd had trickled in, dock workers, Navy personnel retirees, who gathered for their daily coffee and gossip. The diner buzzed with conversation, clinking plates, the rhythm of everyday life. But the booth by the window remained untouched. The plate of bread squares looked strangely out of place, like a small shrine to an absence he didn't yet understand. Harrison stood still, dish towel in hand. A hollowness opened in his chest, subtle but insistent. They'd never missed a morning. Not once. Not in all the weeks they'd been coming. A young sailor approached the counter, breaking through his thoughts. Refill Sir Harrison blinked, realizing he'd been standing motionless. He took the cup, filled it, and nodded. But the sailor lingered, studying him. "You all right?" he asked gently. Harrison forced a polite smile. "Yeah, just distracted." The sailor left. The smile faded. The bell above the door jingled. His head snapped up. But instead of Lena's small, tired frame or Nora's bouncing curls, 4 figures stepped inside, large, imposing, disciplined. Bodyguards. Military. Federal-level presence. Their uniforms weren't standard Navy fatigues. These were tactical suits, sleek black with an emblem Harrison had seen only a handful of times during his service years ago. The diner fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Harrison's heartbeat quickened. He knew that formation. He knew that posture. He knew what it meant when men like that entered a quiet place like this. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The lead guard scanned the room with a practiced, razor-edged sweep. Then he stepped aside, and the air inside the diner shifted, tightened like a current snapping into place. A woman entered. Tall, immaculate white uniform, rows of medals glinting in the morning sun. hair pulled into a controlled knot, eyes sharp as a blade. Admiral Helena Carter, the highest-ranking officer on the eastern naval coast, a name spoken with reverence and fear, a force of nature dressed in authority. Every person in the diner froze. Even the bell above the door seemed to fall silent in her presence. Harrison stood rooted behind the counter towel clenched in his fist. His breath hitched, not because of her rank, but because of the expression on her face. It wasn't command. It wasn't anger. It was something far more unsettling desperation. Her gaze locked onto him instantly, direct, unwavering, as though she had expected him to be exactly where he stood. "Harrison Cole," she asked, her voice steady but threaded with urgency. His stomach dropped. "Yes, ma'am," he managed. Admiral Carter stepped forward, the room parting instinctively around her. She didn't stop until she stood directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the tightness around her eyes. "I need you to come with me," she said quietly. The diner held its breath. Harrison stared at her, confusion tightening his chest. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "What's happened?" Her jaw clenched. She leaned in. Her next words sliced through him. "It's my daughter." His world stopped. "My daughter, Lena," she continued, voice cracking before she forced it steady again. "She's in crisis. She's asking for you." Harrison felt the edges of reality sway, and Nora Admiral Carter whispered, barely audible, "She won't stop crying your name." Every sound in the diner blurred into nothing. The toast squares, the empty booth, the restless feeling that had gnawed at him all morning. It all snapped into terrifying clarity. Harrison didn't think. He didn't breathe. He simply moved. The moment Admiral Carter extended her hand toward the waiting military vehicle outside, he followed. Because the day they didn't come wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of everything. The military SUV lurched forward, its engine humming with the low authoritative growl of government machinery. Harrison sat rigidly in the back seat, flanked by two silent guards. Across from him sat Admiral Helena Carter, hands clasped shoulders, tense jaw locked tight. Her uniform was flawless. Her composure was not. Outside the tinted windows, the coastal road blurred past dock cranes, steel-gray ships mourning joggers, who had no idea the world inside the SUV was holding its breath. Harrison could feel the tension vibrating through the metal frame, like the entire vehicle was bracing for impact. He swallowed hard. "Ma'am, please." What happened? Helena Carter's eyes were fixed straight ahead, but her voice, usually the voice of a woman who commanded fleets, carried a barely restrained tremor. Lena suffered a severe psychological episode at dawn. Harrison's chest tightened. "Is she hurt?" "No physical injuries," Helena answered quickly, but her mental state deteriorated rapidly. She became disoriented, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, and she exhaled shakily. She kept repeating your name. Harrison felt his heart thud painfully. "My name, yes." Admiral Carter finally turned to look at him. "She said she needed you, that you were the only person who could help her." He couldn't find words. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but nothing came out. He didn't understand any of this. He was a janitor, a man who sliced toast in the mornings, a man who kept to himself and lived a quiet life because the noise of the past had become too much, a man who was nobody. "I don't know why she said that," Harrison whispered. Admiral Carter's eyes softened only slightly. "I do." Her gaze drifted past him, as if she were looking through time, not space. "Lena has always carried more weight than a person," she said quietly. "Being a Carter means people expect strength, resilience, perfection, and for years my daughter tried to live up to that, even after losing her husband, even after her deployment abroad." Harrison leaned forward. "Ma'am, she never told me." "No," Helena interrupted gently. "She wouldn't. She hides her pain until it consumes her. A long pause, just like her father did. The Admiral didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. Harrison lowered his eyes, letting the weight of her words settle in his chest. He'd seen glimpses of Lena's struggles, tiny tremors, sudden flinches, the exhaustion she couldn't mask. But he had never imagined the depth of what she carried. The SUV turned sharply, entering the secured medical wing of the naval base. The guards straightened simultaneously, hands on their gear. The atmosphere shifted from tense to urgent. Helena lowered her voice, almost pleading. When the episode hit, Nora panicked. She cried until she couldn't speak. She reached for every doctor, every nurse, screaming for someone named Daddy Harry. Harrison's heart nearly stopped. Nora had called him that once, playfully, innocently. A toddler's mistake, he'd assumed. But hearing it now, hearing it in this context, hit him with the force of a wave. Helena watched him silently. There was no accusation in her eyes, only something achingly human fear. "She won't calm down," Helena whispered. "Not for me, not for anyone. Only you." The SUV slowed to a stop. Two guards opened the door, simultaneously stepping aside with military precision. The air outside was sharp with antiseptic and ocean wind. Harrison stepped out, legs, unsteady eyes sweeping over the secure wing. "Why me?" he murmured, more to himself than to the Admiral. Helena stepped closer, her voice low but commanding. "Because kindness leaves fingerprints, Mr. Cole. Whether you intend it or not." Before he could respond, a piercing cry rang through the hallway. "Mama, Mommy, Daddy, Harry, Nora." Harrison moved instinctively toward the sound, his pulse skyrocketing. He pushed through the doors of the pediatric recovery room, and the rest of the world vanished. Nora was curled into a ball on the hospital bed, tiny hands gripping the railings, tears streaking her cheeks. Two nurses stood nearby, powerless. The child's sobs were raw, wrenching, the kind of sound that tore straight through flesh and bone. "Nora." Harrison breathed. Her head jerked up. For a moment, one suspended heartbeat, her eyes widened in disbelief. Then she threw herself forward. Daddy Harry Harrison caught her mid-leap, her small arms wrapping around his neck with desperate strength. She sobbed into his shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. He held her tight, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head. "It's okay. I'm here," he whispered. "I've got you. You're safe now." Her sobs softened into hiccups as she buried her face in his shirt. The room hushed. Even the machines seemed to quiet themselves. A soft rustle sounded from the next bed over. Harrison turned and froze. Lena. She lay propped against pillows, pale and exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her breaths came shallow, uneven. But when she saw Harrison holding Nora, something in her expression cracked, pain and relief and disbelief all tangled together. "Harrison," she whispered, voice fragile as glass. He stepped toward her bedside slowly, careful not to jostle the trembling child clinging to him. Helena Carter stood at a distance, arms folded tightly across her chest, but her eyes shimmered with something Harrison had never imagined seeing in a woman of her stature. Vulnerability. Lena reached out a trembling hand toward her daughter. "Baby, come here." Harrison gently shifted Nora so she could press into her mother's side. Lena wrapped both arms around her daughter, her fingers shaking, her breaths breaking. Then she lifted her gaze to Harrison. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you to see me like this." Harrison knelt beside her bed, his voice quiet but steady. "Lena, you don't have to hide from me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent, uncontrollable. "I didn't know where else to go in my head," she murmured. "But when it got too dark, all I could think of was the diner. Nora's smile. And you cutting bread like the world wasn't falling apart. Her hand trembled as she brushed Nora's hair. I don't know why, but I felt safe there. Harrison swallowed hard, his voice thick. You're not alone. You're not a burden. And you don't have to be strong every minute of every day. Lena closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words settle into her bones. Helena stepped closer, her voice low but steady. This is why I came for you, Mr. Cole. My daughter needed more than medical intervention. She needed someone who sees her. Without the uniform, Harrison looked from Helena to Lena, then down at Nora, clinging to both of them. He understood now. Not everything, but enough. And when he stood turning toward Helena Carter, she met his eyes with the weight of a mother who'd been waiting years for someone to truly help her child. Mr. Cole, she said quietly. Will you stay? Harrison didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am, because something inside him had shifted irrevocably. A janitor might not change the world, but maybe he could help change theirs. The medical wing quieted as evening approached, casting long shadows through the glass panels. Harrison sat in the small chair beside Lena's bed. Nora curled in his lap, breathing softly, now exhausted, after hours of fear and crying. His arms wrapped around her protectively, as if he could shield her from every bad dream, every tremor, every memory that haunted the Carter family. Lena watched them from her pillow. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face pale, but something in her expression softened as she observed them. She looked like a woman trying to memorize a moment she never expected to see her daughter safe in the arms of a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted more than she trusted the world. A soft beep sounded from the monitor beside her, steady and reassuring. Harrison brushed a strand of hair from Nora's forehead. The little girl murmured something unintelligible and burrowed closer into his chest. Lena exhaled shakily. You're good with her, she whispered. Harrison looked up. She's a good kid. She is, Lena murmured. Better than I deserve. He narrowed his eyes. Don't say that. Lena looked away, jaw tightening. Sometimes I think Nora deserved a mother stronger than me. Someone who doesn't fall apart over the sound of a dropped tray. Someone who sleeps through the night. Someone who isn't afraid of her own memories. Her voice broke. Someone who didn't lose her husband and half of herself with him. The air grew heavier. Harrison stood gently laying Nora beside her mother. The child curled instinctively toward Lena's warmth. He then pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, leaning forward. Lena, he said quietly, what you've lived through would break anyone. And yet, you're still here. You still get up every morning. You still carry on for her. She shook her head, tears forming again. Carrying on isn't the same as living. No, he agreed softly, but it's the first step toward it. Silence settled between them. A silence heavy with meaning, but not uncomfortable. A silence of two people who had seen more than they wanted to admit. Finally, Lena's voice trembled. This morning, before everything happened, I felt something tightening inside me, like the walls were closing in. Harrison nodded for her to continue. I tried to breathe, but my chest locked. I tried to stand, but my legs shook. And Nora, she kept saying she was hungry, she wanted toast. Lena's lips trembled into a sad smile. She always talks about your bread squares. He felt warmth spread in his chest. She just likes the tiny pieces. No, Lena whispered. It's more. She feels safe when you're around. Harrison swallowed hard. I never meant to become anything more than a friendly face at breakfast. Lena looked at him, really looked at him. That's exactly why you matter. He blinked, stunned by the sincerity in her voice. You never asked anything of us, she continued. You never probed or pried or offered advice I didn't want. You just showed up. Every morning. With kindness. With steadiness. She paused. That kind of consistency is rare, especially in the military, especially in my life. Harrison shifted, unsure of how to respond. Compliments made him uncomfortable, not because he didn't appreciate them, but because he seldom believed he deserved them. Lena, he murmured, I'm just a janitor. No, her voice was firm even in her vulnerability. You're a man who makes my daughter laugh, a man who kneels down to her level instead of towering over her, a man who noticed every tremor I tried to hide, and didn't treat me like I was broken. She swallowed hard. You have no idea how rare that is. Harrison's breath stilled. She wasn't praising him. She was exposing a truth she'd buried under years of duty loss and expectation. He could feel the weight of it. Before he could speak, Nora stirred her tiny hand, reaching blindly until it found Harrison's shirt. She gripped the fabric, as if she feared he might slip away. Lena's voice cracked. That's what scares me most, she whispered. Nora's getting attached. And I don't know what that means. For her, for me, for you. Harrison glanced at the child's small fingers holding on to him. The warmth of her trust mixed with a sudden ache of responsibility. I don't know what it means either, he admitted quietly. But I know I'd never hurt her. Or you. Lena's eyes glistened again. I don't want Nora to grow up without someone she can run to, without someone to call. She stopped herself, biting back the emotion. Harrison leaned closer, his voice gentle but unwavering. What is it? Lena. Her lips quivered. She met his gaze with a rawness that sent a shiver through him. I'm not scared of missions, or deployments, or my own shadows. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm scared Nora will grow up with no one she can call Dad. The words fell between them like glass, fragile, painful, impossibly honest. Harrison felt something inside him shift, a weight, a responsibility, a tenderness he hadn't felt since holding his own son as a newborn. He thought of Lucas, of the years he'd spent learning how to be both mother and father, of the loneliness that trailed behind him long after the divorce. He understood Lena's fear. More than she knew, he lowered his voice. Lena, no child should feel that emptiness. I know that better than most. Her breath caught. The look they shared then was unlike anything before two wounded souls, recognizing something familiar in each other, something broken, but not beyond repair. Before either could speak again, the door opened quietly. Admiral Helena Carter stepped inside. Her imposing presence was softened now, her hair slightly undone from hours of tension. She paused at the sight of Harrison close to Lena. Nora nestled between them. For the first time, her expression wasn't stern discipline or strategic calculation. It was gratitude. And something else, something like hope. Mr. Cole, she said gently, the situation is stable for now, and I want to thank you. My daughter. She hasn't spoken this openly in months. Lena flushed, embarrassed. Mom. But Helena raised a hand. You needed someone who listens. Lena. Someone who sees you as my daughter, not my rank. She looked at Harrison. You did what our entire medical team couldn't. Harrison stood rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't do anything special. Yes, Helena said softly. You did. She glanced at her granddaughter curled against Harrison's hand. And for Nora, it seems you've become her anchor. Harrison didn't know what to say. Lena whispered, voice barely audible. Maybe he's mine too. The words hit him like a quiet storm. Helena pretended not to hear, but her eyes softened even more. That night, as Harrison finally left the medical wing, Lena's voice followed him in the hallway. Please come back tomorrow." He turned. She gave a fragile, grateful smile. "Both of us need you more than you know." And Harrison realized he needed them too. The next morning, Harrison arrived at the Naval Medical Wing earlier than expected. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because sleep had been impossible, or maybe because something inside him had shifted in a way he couldn't unfeel. The memory of Lena's trembling voice, Nora's desperate cries, and Helena Carter's unexpected vulnerability played on a loop in his mind. He wasn't a man accustomed to being needed. But now, he was. A young ensign at the front desk looked up as he approached. Mr. Cole Harrison nodded. "They're expecting you." The ensign's tone held something between respect and confusion. After all, civilians didn't often get escorted into restricted areas. But today, the rules bent for him. As Harrison walked down the corridor, he saw Admiral Helena Carter standing outside Lena's room. Her white uniform still immaculate, but her posture, usually sharp enough to cut steel, seemed softened, weighted by a sleepless night. "Good morning," Harrison said quietly. Helena turned. For the first time, she didn't look like an admiral greeting a subordinate. She looked like a mother, tired, worried, clinging to dignity. "Mr. Cole." She paused. "Thank you for coming back." He offered a polite nod. "How is she?" Helena exhaled slowly. "Resting. Medically stable. But emotionally." She hesitated. "She responds only when Nora's close. And when you're in the room." Harrison felt something warm and painful stir in his chest. "I just want her to feel safe." "That's precisely why you're here," Helena murmured. There was a long, unspoken silence. The Admiral studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in assessment. The way one evaluates a man not by his resume, but by his heart. Finally, she spoke in a tone quieter than he thought she was capable of. "My daughter has endured more loss than a young woman should. I spent years believing strength meant silence. That discipline was how you protect the people you love." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong." Harrison remained still, letting her words settle. "Lena doesn't need rank," Helena whispered. "She needs gentleness. And somehow, Mr. Cole, you provide that better than anyone I've ever seen." Harrison was stunned. Compliments from a fleet admiral especially, one like Helena Carter, didn't come freely. Before he could reply, a soft voice drifted from inside the room. "Mom, is he here?" Helena glanced toward the doorway, then stepped aside. "Go on," she said. "She's awake." Harrison entered. Lena sat up in the bed, hair messy but eyes clearer than yesterday. Nora was curled beside her, half asleep, but clutching the corner of her mother's blanket. When Lena saw Harrison, something in her posture relaxed a tension unspooling from deep inside. "Hey," Harrison said softly. "How are you feeling?" Lena tried to smile. Physically, she looked fragile. Emotionally, she looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, one step from falling, one step from learning she had wings. "I've been better," she murmured, "but I'm still here." Harrison sat in the chair beside her. Lena watched him with a quiet, searching gaze. "You came back," she said. "Of course I did." Her eyes glistened. "You didn't have to." "I know." A beat of silence, meaningful, heavy, filled with the unspoken. Nora stirred again, her tiny hand reaching out until she found Harrison's sleeve. She tugged it weakly. "Daddy." "Harry," she whispered, half dreaming. Lena inhaled sharply, emotions flooding her features. Pain, gratitude, fear, hope. "I'm sorry she calls you that," Lena whispered. "Don't be." Harrison gently held Nora's hand. Kids feel what they feel. Lena closed her eyes, letting that truth settle. After a moment, Helena stepped quietly inside, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. She watched the three of them, Harrison, Lena, Nora, with an expression conflicted, yet profoundly moved. Lena noticed her mother and looked away, shame flickering across her face. "Mom, I didn't want you to see me like this." Helena pushed off the wall, her tone uncharacteristically soft. "I'm your mother, Lena. I would rather see you broken and healing than pretending you're fine." Lena's eyes filled. "You always needed me to be strong." "No," Helena corrected gently. "I needed you to survive. I failed to see those weren't the same thing." Harrison watched the exchange in silence. This was not the Admiral he saw on TV screens. This was a woman confronting years of emotional distance and trying in her own way to mend it. Helena turned her attention to Harrison. "Mr. Cole." He stood instinctively. "You've shown me something I forgot existed in the uniformed world," she said. "A different kind of strength, the kind that heals instead of commands." She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "My daughter needs that. My granddaughter needs that. And whether you realize it or not, they've already formed a bond with you that I cannot ignore." Lena swallowed, hard eyes darting between them. Helena's next words were firm but warm, almost hopeful. "You are not just a janitor in a diner. Not to them." Harrison felt heat rise to his face, embarrassment and humility mixing with something deeper, something that felt like purpose. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he murmured. "No," Helena said. "You simply showed up. Every day. Without fail." Her voice softened to almost a whisper. "That kind of man is rare." Lena's eyes shone with gratitude she couldn't put into words. Harrison sat again, Nora still clutching his fingers. He looked at Lena. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since he met her, Lena didn't hide her tears. She let them fall quietly, freely, as she whispered, "We need you, Harrison." And though she didn't say the next part out loud, he felt it. "And maybe I do too." The rest of the morning passed in gentle quiet. Harrison told Nora a story about a brave little rabbit. Lena leaned back, watching him with an expression that blended admiration and fear. Fear that this fragile piece might shatter, and admiration that he made it feel possible at all. Helena stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching a scene she had not seen in years. Her daughter feeling safe, her granddaughter secure. A stranger, yet not a stranger, mending cracks a fleet of doctors could not. And when the sun shifted across the room, casting warm light over all three of them, Helena Carter whispered to herself, "Maybe this is the miracle we didn't know we needed." The following afternoon brought a kind of fragile calm to the medical wing. Lena had slept better than she had in weeks. Nora, reassured that Harrison would return, finally stopped waking in panic. And Admiral Helena Carter, who had spent most of her life commanding storms, felt herself learning how to stand still in a quiet room. But peace, no matter how comforting, was rarely permanent in a family, shaped by duty and secrets. When Harrison arrived, he found Lena sitting near the window, sunlight catching in her hair. Her posture relaxed for the first time since he'd known her. Nora sat in his arms, happily babbling to her stuffed rabbit. Helena stood nearby, reading something on her tablet, her expression tight, controlled, but undeniably troubled. "Morning," Harrison said softly. Lena lifted her eyes. The smile she offered was small, but real. "Morning." Nora wriggled out of Harrison's arms and climbed onto Lena's lap, proudly showing her mother the rabbit's new bow made from a hospital ribbon. For a moment, all three of them laughed. Then, Helena's tablet chimed. A low, cold sound. A tone that didn't belong in a room warmed by tenderness. Harrison watched Helena stiffen. Her eyes scanned the incoming document. Her jaw locked. Her hand trembled faintly, so faintly no one else in the room might have noticed. But Harrison noticed everything. Lena's face sobered. "Mom," she asked carefully. "What is it?" Helena swallowed. "A classified delivery just came in from D.C., her voice lowered. "It's the final investigative report on your husband." The room froze. Lena's fingers tightened instinctively around Nora. A flicker of fear, pure, unfiltered fear, crossed her face. "No," she whispered. "Mom, please don't do this here." Helena took a slow breath. "Lena, you need to prepare yourself." Lena shook her head violently. "I can't. Not right now. My head isn't." "I can't." Harrison immediately stepped closer. "Helena, maybe this isn't a good." But Helena Carter wasn't the type to be stopped easily. Only this time, her determination didn't come from rank or discipline. It came from guilt. "I've been hiding this report," she said hoarsely, "for months. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you weren't ready. But keeping it from you was wrong." Lena's breathing grew shallow, rapid, panicked. Harrison recognized the signs. PTSD wasn't a distant storm. It lived under her skin, waiting for the slightest spark. Nora looked between the adults, confused by the tension. She clung to her mother's uniform. Mommy Lena blinked fast, trying to anchor herself. "I don't want to know," she whispered. "Please, Mom, not now. Not today." Helena's expression cracked just a little. The hardest part of leadership was knowing when to push and when to step back. And right now, she didn't know which was right. "I'll come back later," Helena said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. But as she turned toward the door, Lena's voice, thin, trembling, stopped her. "What does it say?" Helena froze. Harrison took a step toward Lena. "You don't have to do this." "I do," she breathed. "Because every night, every dream, every memory, there's this question haunting me. Did he die because I wasn't strong enough? Or because I wasn't there to help him?" Her voice cracked. "And if I don't face the truth, I'll never heal." Helena stood silent for a long moment before crossing the room and gently placing the tablet on the table beside her daughter. "Sit," she urged softly. Lena did. Harrison remained close, heart pounding, unable to look away. Helena took a breath and spoke. "They found evidence," she said quietly. "New evidence. The circumstances of his death were misreported. He wasn't negligent like they implied. His unit wasn't compromised by his mistake." Her voice broke. "He died, saving others." Lena's face crumpled. He saved them. He saved 3, Helena whispered. "He stayed behind to cover the exit. And he didn't run." That was never the truth. They buried that part because of operational errors higher up. Lena gasped, a choked sound of relief and grief colliding. She covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The pain wasn't lighter, but it shifted, reshaped itself into something both sharper and more bearable. But the Admiral wasn't done. "There's more," she murmured. "The report, it includes photos, letters, and a final recording he made." Lena's entire body shook. "A recording," Helena nodded, eyes glistening. "Addressed to you. And to Nora." The world tilted. Harrison reached out, gripping the side of the bed. Not for himself, but to ground himself enough to stay steady for Lena. "Do you want to hear it?" Helena asked, her voice almost breaking. Lena opened her mouth, but no sound came. Nora looked up with innocent eyes. Mommy sat. Lena held her daughter close, nuzzling her hair, grounding herself in the warmth of Nora's small body. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's sad. But Mommy's okay." Harrison knelt beside her, resting a hand lightly on the edge of the bed, close but not touching her unless she reached for him. "You're not alone," he said gently. Lena looked at him, a long, raw, unguarded look, and then something inside her broke, not into chaos, but into surrender. She leaned forward, not toward her mother, not toward the tablet, but toward Harrison. Her forehead touched his shoulder, her breath shaking against him. Harrison froze for a moment, stunned by the trust. Then he slowly lifted a hand and rested it on her back, gentle, steady. Nora crawled onto Harrison's knee, placing her small hand over her mother's. It formed a chain of fragile connection, mother-daughter, and the man who had become their quiet anchor. Helena watched tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "My daughter has endured so much," she whispered, voice breaking. "And yet, she reaches for you." Harrison looked up at the Admiral. "I'm not sure why." Helena shook her head. "I am." Her voice steadied with truth. "Because you're the first person who ever made her feel safe without asking for anything in return." Lena's sobs quieted. She lifted her head, eyes swollen but clearer. "I'm not ready to hear the recording today," she whispered. "But soon." Helena nodded. "Whenever you're ready." As the Admiral stepped outside to give them privacy, Harrison remained beside Lena and Nora, holding them both within the circle of his presence. And for the first time, Lena's voice carried something new. Not fear, not grief. A plea. "Don't leave us," she whispered. Harrison's throat tightened. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside the door, Helena Carter leaned against the wall, exhaling a shaky breath. For years, she believed power, rank, and discipline would protect her family. But now she realized something else. Something she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. A man who could hold her daughter's heart gently enough to let it heal. The storm arrived 3 days later, not the kind that rattled windows or swept over the bay, but the kind that cracked the fragile peace the Carter family had begun to rebuild. It began with a summons. A formal, cold, bureaucratic notice delivered directly to Admiral Helena Carter's office. A hearing had been scheduled an internal military review panel after a senior officer filed a formal petition questioning Lena's mental fitness to continue serving. And worse, suggesting she was unfit to parent Nora alone. Helena read the document twice before the meaning fully sank in. By evening, that summons reached the medical wing and shattered Lena. "No," she whispered, staring at the letter in her hands. "They can't do this. They can't decide whether I can keep my own daughter." Harrison stood beside her, heart pounding. He could see fear tearing at her from the inside, fear far different from the shadows of her PTSD. Fear of losing Nora. Helena tried to keep her voice steady, but emotion cracked through every word. "Lena, I'll fight this with everything I have." "They outrank you," Lena choked out. "If they push this, they'll win." "No," Helena insisted. "Not if the truth is seen." Lena's eyes brimmed with tears. "Mom, I can't lose her. She's all I have left." Helena embraced her daughter, an embrace years overdue. "We won't let that happen." But despite the Admiral's strength, despite Harrison's steady presence, fear lingered in the room like smoke. Because Lena knew what hearings like this were cold, rigid, places where vulnerability was not seen as human, but as weakness. And weakness in the military had consequences. Harrison stayed as long as she needed him. Nora curled in his lap, unaware of the danger playing with his shirt buttons, while her mother broke quietly beside him. And when they finally left for the night, Lena grabbed his hand. "Promise me you'll be there tomorrow," she whispered. Harrison met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "I will." The next day, Norfolk Naval Headquarters buzzed with tension. Officers moved briskly through the corridors, radios crackling, boots clicking against polished floors. But inside the conference chamber, where the hearing would take place, the atmosphere was thick, solemn, more courtroom than military. 6 officers sat behind a long table, uniforms, crisp expressions unreadable. At the center was Vice Admiral Roswell, a man known for his rigid adherence to regulations and his disdain for emotional nuance. He adjusted his glasses and began reading from his file. "Lieutenant Lena Carter, service record exemplary, deployment history marked by both commendable bravery and incidents of psychological instability following combat trauma. Lena sat at a smaller table across from them, her hands trembling despite her effort to stay composed. Helena sat behind her. In support, jaw-clenched eyes burning with protective fire. Nora played quietly in the hallway, under supervision, unaware that people inside this room were deciding the direction of her life. Roswell continued. The petition before us argues that Lieutenant Carter's current mental state poses a risk to mission readiness and potentially to the well-being of her child. The words struck Lena like physical blows. Her breathing hitched, but then she felt a hand touch her shoulder. Harrison. He had arrived. Helena gave him a small, grateful nod. Roswell glanced at Harrison but did not acknowledge him. Instead, he leaned forward. Lieutenant Carter, do you have anything to say regarding these concerns? Lena's voice was thin. I'm in treatment. I'm trying. I'm getting better. Roswell raised a brow. And yet you suffered an episode requiring emergency intervention just 72 hours ago. Lena's throat tightened. She looked down. One of the officers scribbled notes. It was a brutal scene. A room built to judge, not understand. A panel trained to see risk, not humanity. Just as Lena's composure began to falter, the door suddenly opened. A guard stepped in. Vice Admiral, a civilian, requests permission to speak on the lieutenant's behalf. Roswell frowned. This is a military review. We do not take civilian testimony. The guard cleared his throat. Sir, it's Harrison Cole. Roswell looked irritated. Who before the guard could answer, Harrison stepped inside. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't carry documents. He wasn't a decorated veteran or high-ranking officer, just a man in a simple button-up shirt, hands, steady gaze, unwavering. Helena rose. I invited him. Roswell scoffed. Admiral, you know our rules. Helena stepped forward, voice cold steel. Mr. Cole has information this board needs to hear, and as the highest-ranking officer in this room, I am authorizing his statement. A tense silence fell. Roswell's jaw tightened, but he couldn't override her. Very well, he snapped. You have 3 minutes. Harrison nodded respectfully, then walked to stand beside Lena. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. She was holding herself together by threads. Harrison faced the panel. I'm Harrison Cole. I'm a janitor at the Harbor Diner. And I'm not here to talk about military procedures or service records. He paused. I'm here to talk about a mother. The room went still. Harrison continued, voice calm but strong. For months, I've seen Lena Carter every morning at my diner. Not the uniform. Not the rank. Just Lena. A woman who wakes up before dawn to make a little girl's day brighter. A woman who pushes through exhaustion and fear to give her daughter stability. A woman who never lets her pain spill onto the people around her. He glanced toward the hallway, where Nora's laughter faintly echoed. You say she's unstable. I say she's brave. Roswell's brow furrowed. Mr. Cole Harrison didn't back down. I've watched her fight her way through mornings that would break most people. I've seen her steady her daughter's hands before steadying her own. I've seen her love that child so fiercely that it pulls her through nights she barely survives. He took a breath. And I've seen Nora, a child who clings to her mother, not out of fear, but out of love. A child who doesn't feel safe unless her mother is near. You take Lena from her. You don't protect her. You destroy her. The room fell silent. The officers shifted, uncomfortable. Even Roswell looked unsettled. Helena's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. Harrison stepped closer to the panel. I don't know military regulations, but I know what kindness looks like. I know what courage looks like. And I know what a good mother looks like. He gestured toward Lena. You want to protect the integrity of the service, then support the soldiers who are fighting battles long after they return home. Don't punish them for being human. He backed away just a step, but his final words carried through the chamber like a quiet command. Lena Carter deserves her daughter, and Nora deserves her mother. Nothing you decide in this room will change that truth. When Harrison finished, the room held its breath. And then, unexpectedly, Helena Carter began to clap. Slow, deliberate, defiant. Others followed, first one officer, then another, then two more. Only Roswell sat rigid, unwilling to yield, but even he could feel the momentum shift. Harrison returned to Lena's side. She finally lifted her eyes to him. In them was gratitude, astonishment, and something deeper, something unspoken, something growing. The decision from the review board arrived 2 days later. Lena Carter kept her commission. She would remain in the Navy, but under extended medical leave. She would retain full custody of Nora. And most shocking to the officers who filed complaints, the panel recommended family-based stabilization, not disciplinary action. Admiral Helena Carter never confirmed it, but everyone knew Harrison's testimony had shifted the room. The storm that threatened to tear Lena's world apart had passed. But storms rarely leave without scars, and now came the quiet aftermath, the space where healing either flourished or withered. Harrison spent the next week helping Lena transition back into routine, not military routine, but human routine. Gentle mornings, slow afternoons, evening walks near the coast where the wind carried the scent of sea salt and possibility. It was Helena who first suggested the move. You need a stable environment, she told Lena. Somewhere peaceful, somewhere safe. Her eyes drifted to Harrison. And somewhere close to people who care. Helena had many talents, but subtlety was not one of them, which was how Harrison ended up standing in front of a small cottage near the dunes, a short walk from the diner, a short drive from the base. The paint was old, the porch needed repairs, but the place breathed warmth the moment they stepped inside. This could work, Harrison said, bending to inspect a loose floorboard. Lena watched him, arms folded, an amused smile tugging her lips. You've said that about every house we've seen. He shrugged. I mean it this time. Nora burst into the living room, her little boots thumping against the wood floor. Mommy, this house has echoes. She stomped again. The room echoed. She squealed with delight. Lena couldn't help laughing. The sound light, unguarded, stunned Harrison for a moment. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd seen her laugh freely. It was like watching a flower open after too many cold seasons. Helena stepped through the doorway, arms crossed as she surveyed the interior. For once, her posture wasn't rigid. She looked hopeful. If you choose this one, she said, the Navy will cover half the lease for the duration of your leave. Consider it support, not charity. Lena's eyes widened. Mom, that's a lot. It's what families do, Helena replied quietly. Lena blinked at her mother, 2 decades of distance melting inch by inch. And when she stepped forward to hug Helena, the Admiral froze for a fraction of a second before pulling her daughter close. It was the smallest reconciliation. But it was real. A week later, Lena and Nora moved in, and Harrison became the steady hands that helped build their new beginning, patching the porch rails, repainting the front door, tightening the loose fixtures, fixing the old heater. Lucas Harrison's son joined on weekends, forming a quiet bond with Nora as they built sand piles by the beach. One evening, as the sun dipped low across the water, Lena stood on the porch, watching Harrison tighten a porch light fixture. His arms flexed as he worked shadows brushing across the strong lines of his shoulders. He looked so grounded, so capable, that Lena's breath caught unexpectedly. You really don't have to do all this, she said softly. Harrison put down the screwdriver and turned to her with a crooked smile. You keep saying that. Doesn't mean I'll listen. She smiled back, small but warm. Why, Harrison? Why are you doing all this for us? He paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't sure how to say it, without revealing everything he'd tried to keep quiet. Because, he said slowly, kindness is easier when you care. Lena exhaled, feeling tears threaten. You care. Harrison met her gaze, steady, open, vulnerable. More than I realized. Lena's heart fluttered, something she hadn't felt since before the war, before loss carved its marks across her life. She stepped closer, watching the fading sunlight catch in his hair. I'm scared, she whispered. Of me, his voice was gentle. No. Of what it means. To hope again. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, slowly, deliberately giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. You're allowed to hope, Harrison murmured. Her breath shook. What if I break again? He cupped her cheek with one calloused hand. Then I'll be here to help you stand. You don't have to do everything alone anymore. A tear escaped down her cheek. He wiped it softly with his thumb. Then, after days of unspoken glances, weeks of shared vulnerability, and months of mourning rituals quietly tying their lives together, Lena leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, intentional. A letting go of fear and letting in of light. Harrison kissed her back, one hand on her waist, the other steady against her lower back, as if anchoring her to a world where she didn't have to be strong all the time. A long, quiet moment passed. When they finally parted, Lena rested her forehead against his. I've been waiting, she whispered, for something to feel right again. Harrison smiled softly. Me too. Behind them, Nora peeked from the doorway, her stuffed rabbit in hand. Mommy Harry. Are we gonna have dinner? Lena blushed, wiping her eyes. Harrison chuckled, ruffling Nora's hair. Yeah, kiddo, let's eat. As they stepped inside the warm glow of the cottage, Helena Carter watched from the sidewalk, unnoticed. Arms crossed, eyes softened, a smile, gentle, proud, touching her lips. Her daughter wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And Harrison Cole, quiet, humble, steady. Harrison had become the home Lena didn't know she was searching for. A full year passed before Harrison realized how profoundly everything had changed, not with a single moment, but with hundreds of quiet ones, stitched together like gold threads in the fabric of their new life. The cottage near the dunes had slowly become more than a house. It had become theirs. Lucas spent weekends there. Helena dropped by more often than she'd admit. Navy colleagues visited occasionally, surprised to see the once rigid Admiral drinking lemonade on a porch swing, while her granddaughter sprinkled sand on her boots. But it was the mornings that defined this new chapter. The same mornings that once unfolded in a lonely diner booth now took place at a wooden kitchen table, bathed in ocean light. Nora giggling in her pajamas, Lucas laughing as he pretended to burn toast, Lena humming softly as she poured coffee, and Harrison slicing bread into tiny squares, out of habit. Love, and a memory that no longer ached. One morning, as Nora climbed onto her booster seat, Harrison laid the warm plate of bread squares in front of her. Nora grinned the same way she had 100 times before, but today something was different. She didn't just say, "Thank you," or "Yummy," or "Harry." She tilted her head, smiled with absolute certainty, and said, "Daddy Harry, you cut them perfect." The words were gentle, natural, spoken with the easy confidence of a child who knew exactly where she belonged. Harrison froze. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering softly onto the cutting board. Across the kitchen, Lena turned from the counter, eyes widening, breath catching. Helena, who had stopped by early to drop off a care package, went perfectly still. Nora blinked innocently at the silence. "What did I say it wrong?" Harrison knelt down until he was eye level with her. "No, sweetheart," he said. Voice thick. "You said it exactly right." Nora beamed, leaning forward to wrap her tiny arms around his neck. At that moment, simple, unassuming, beautiful Lena felt something inside her chest loosen, then melt entirely. A year ago, she had feared her daughter would grow up without a father's presence. Today, that fear dissolved like morning fog. Later after breakfast, Harrison stepped out onto the porch to watch the tide. Lena followed him quietly, hands tucked into her sweater sleeves. She stood beside him, letting the breeze brush across her face. "You okay?" he asked, eyes soft. Lena nodded, just thinking. About Nora. About everything she whispered. About how you walked into our lives with a plate of toast and changed everything we thought we'd lost. Harrison chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't change anything. You and Nora, you did that yourselves." Lena turned to him, stepping closer, searching his face with the same depth she had the day she confessed her fear of hope. "You healed us," she said quietly. "You held us together when I couldn't hold myself together. You were there in the darkness, in the fear, and in the mornings when I was too tired to believe life could be gentle again." Harrison swallowed emotion, tightening his chest. "Lena, no." She laid her hand on his chest. "Let me finish." Her eyes glistened. "You were our miracle. Not loud, not dramatic, just real, steady, kind." She closed her eyes for a breath. "You brought my heart back to life, Harry, and I want to spend the rest of my life bringing yours home too." Harrison leaned his forehead against hers. "You already have." They stayed like that, bodies close ocean wind brushing around them until Helena stepped onto the porch with Lucas and Nora tugging at her hands. "Come on," Helena said, unable to suppress a smile. "We're doing family photos. And yes," she added, lifting a brow at Harrison. "You count as family now." Harrison grinned. "Yes, ma'am." Lena's laughter, light, musical, free, carried across the yard as they gathered near the dunes. Nora insisted on sitting on Harrison's shoulders. Lucas held the family dog in a hilariously crooked pose. Helena attempted to look dignified, but Nora smeared sunscreen across her jacket, sending everyone into hysterics. The camera clicked, and in that still image, capturing messy hair, crooked smiles, and imperfect perfection, something sacred was preserved. Not just a moment. A rebirth. That evening, as the sun slipped low and painted the sky in pink and gold, Harrison walked along the shore with Lena and the kids. Nora chased seagulls. Lucas skipped stones. Lena threaded her fingers through Harrison's. The world felt whole. Lena paused and pointed toward the horizon. "Look," she whispered. A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the water with a golden path stretching from shore to sky. Harrison breathed in the sight. "It looks like a new beginning," Lena murmured. "It is," he said. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Harrison, for what he asked, for giving us a home again." She smiled softly. "For choosing us." He kissed the top of her head. "No," he murmured. "You and Nora. You brought my heart home long before I ever stepped foot into this one." They stood together as waves rolled gently against the sand, the light shifting around them, warm, steady, eternal. And as Nora ran into Harrison's arms once more, laughter echoing across the shoreline, Lena whispered a truth she finally believed: kindness saved us. And Harrison, lifting Nora high into the fading sunlight, whispered back, "It saved me first." In the glow of that new dawn, 3 lives once marked by loss became a family stitched together, not by blood, but by compassion, resilience, and the quiet miracle of a single plate of toast that began everything. Before we close today's story, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story touched your heart the most? Your thoughts and experiences mean a great deal to us, and we read every comment with gratitude. If these quiet moments of kindness and courage speak to you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so you can join us for many more stories of hope, healing, and second chances. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with us today. Your presence here is truly appreciated, and we hope this story brought a little warmth to your day.